Hey guys, all right, it's time for the final video for World War II. We finished the war. We talked about the war in the Pacific a few nights ago and talking about fighting off the Japanese. Um, and we've talked about the end of Hitler. We talked about the end of the Italians. The war is over. Everything is done. The atomic bombs have been dropped. Japan has finally surrendered. But there's still one more thing that we haven't talked about yet that we're going to get into tonight. That was a very important part of World War II, and one thing that we should never forget, and that is the Holocaust. The Holocaust was an event taken place by Adolf Hitler and by the Nazi Party to pretty much rid Europe of the Jewish race. And that's what we're going to be talking about this evening is the Holocaust. Um, we're going to look at several different events here, beginning in 1938, 1939, and look at several major events and things and attributes in regards to the Holocaust. Before we get to that, it's really important to understand, or rather to remind you, that this whole idea of anti-Semitism, which is hatred or discrimination against the Jews, did not begin with Adolf Hitler or the Nazis. We talked a few weeks ago about the Nazi Party and Hitler and the discrimination against the Jews and Hitler's whole intention of having an Aryan race of pure-blooded Germans, which would not obviously have included Jews. We talked about how the three groups that Hitler always blamed were Jews, communists, and the November criminals. And so the Jews were discriminated against by Hitler from the very beginning. And we always refer to anti-Semitism and hatred against the Jews and discrimination against the Jews. We always refer back to Hitler and the Nazis. But it's really important to understand that that's been going on for hundreds of years, well before Hitler was even thought of. You had to go back 2,000 years to look at when the Romans kicked the Jews out of Jerusalem. And from that point on, the Jewish race had to migrate to certain parts of Europe and Asia. And that's when anti-Semitism began. Jews, for most of the last 2,000 years, were seen by Europeans as outsiders, as aliens, as people who didn't belong there. It was not a home country for the Jews for over 2,000 years. And so what Hitler, talks here about the Jews is really nothing new in Hitler. I'm sorry, is really nothing new in Europe. But what Hitler does about it is something that is different. And that's why it's important to talk about it. This whole idea of anti-Semitism, of hatred and discrimination against the Jews was nothing that was new for Europe, been going on for 2,000 years up to that point. But what Hitler does next is going to be different. It is why we're talking about this tonight, and it's why we need to remember what happened and going into the future. Let's begin in November of 1938. November of 1938, before World War II actually began, we have what's called Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht translates into the Night of the Broken Glass. This is going to be the beginning remnants of what will eventually be the Holocaust. If you think back to a few weeks ago when we talked about the rise of Hitler, that when he became Chancellor of Germany and then eventually the dictator of Germany when Hindenburg died, Hitler immediately begins Nazifying Germany. He is going to take opposing political parties and leaders and intellectuals and people that could be a threat or danger to him. And in 1933, he's already putting them in concentration camps. Now, keep in mind, concentration camps at that point were not necessarily death camps. There were certainly a lot of beatings and tortures and murders going on in concentration camps, but it's not necessarily a place that you went to die. It was pretty much a prison that was cut off from society. And so Hitler begins at 1933 in silencing a lot of different people. And we talked all about the different ways that he Nazified Germany in 1933, 34, 35, 36, and 37. That as we get into World War II, Germany is this whole Nazi nation that has been transformed into Hitler's beliefs. his hatred against the Jews was nothing that was uncommon. It was nothing that was hidden. If you go, they're kind of hard to find these days. YouTube has removed a lot of these videos, but if you look in the right place, there are speeches by Hitler in the middle 30s, in the mid 1930s, to where he talks about the Jewish problem, where he talks about the Jews must be eradicated and forced out of Germany, and so his hatred against the Jews was nothing that was. First of all, it was nothing that was uncommon. Second of all, it was nothing that that he was shy away from. He was very public in this, but he doesn't do a whole lot about it until we get to 1938. November of 1938, this whole Kristallnacht is the first time that we see actual action against the Jews by Hitler. Um, Kristallnacht was a wave of anti-Jewish terror. It is kind of the beginning remnants of gathering up the Jews in Germany and in the German-controlled territories, and either putting them into isolation areas of cities or just flat out beatings and murders of the Jews. There were a lot of Jews that were flat out murdered here by the Nazi Party in this whole idea of Kristallnacht. So again, Kristallnacht, or the Night of the Broken Glass, in November of 1938, was really the beginning of what we're going to see in regards to the Holocaust. The next year, in 1939, as Germany invades Poland, which again, keep in mind, was the actual event that began World War II. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, that's when France and Great Britain declared war on Germany, and World War II officially begins. So when Hitler invades Poland in 1939, what he's going to do is that he's going to use his new territory as a place for the Jews. Again, beginning in 1938, Hitler had begun to round up a lot of the Jews. There were a lot of beatings, a lot of killings, a lot of discrimination. And then as he gains more and more territory, then he's going to begin to take all these Jews living in Germany and he's going to ship them out into different areas. And so that's what happens in 1938, in that he uses certain areas of Poland for what he calls the ghettos, which are communities in areas and regions where all the Jews in Germany are shipped to. It's basically isolating all of the Jews in one or just a few areas. What Hitler is doing here is that he's setting up his ultimate plan. He's getting all the Jews out of original Germany. He is getting them all in one place. And when it's time to put forth his plan in regards to the Holocaust, then everybody is right in one place, just like he wants them to be. He is setting up in what he has planned in his ultimate plan for the Jews. In June of 1939, we began the mass killings of the Jews, to where again there have been Jews that have been killed by Hitler and the Nazis beginning in 1938, probably years before that as well. But in June of 1939, we began really the first mass killings of Jews, of dozens of Jews at one time. And one of the popular methods that was used by the Nazis was that you had mobile gas vans. You would have members of the Nazi Party, or at this point in time, they're basically Nazi soldiers, members of the SS, who would drive up to these ghettos with these giant vans, and they would load in as many Jews as they could, usually Jewish men, and tell them that they were taking them to a different part of town. And so they would pack as many as they could in there. And as the van drove away down the street, in the ventilator in the back would be a poisonous toxic gas, basically a gas chamber in the back of a van. And so that was one of the more popular methods used by the I say by the Nazis, by the SS here, in regards to the first mass killings of the Jewish people. So again, we're seeing the first remnants here of what Hitler has in plan for the Jews, and that is murder, death, killing them in this case, by the dozens, eventually by the thousands, and by the millions. And that's what happens for the next couple of years. On July 31st, 1941, as World War II is now full blown into action, France has fallen to Germany. Germany is at this point trying to go after Great Britain and the Soviet Union. On July 31st, 1941, Hitler makes the official statement or the official decision, because the question had been all along, what are we going to do about the Jewish problem? What are we going to do about the Jews? If we're going to create a pure blooded German society, then what are we going to do about the people who are not pure blooded Germans? And it wasn't really just the Jews, it was other people as well. Um, there were gypsies, there were Poles, there were different ethnic groups as well. But again, the question here was, what are we going to do about the Jews? The solution to the Jewish problem. That solution was something that Hitler called the final solution. The final solution is going to be the Holocaust, the mass extermination of the Jewish race. I want to say that again, the mass extermination of the Jewish race, killing all of the Jews, killing off an entire race, is what the final solution was. It was Hitler's official ordering to kill the Jewish race. Now, I want you to understand one thing here, and that as we talk about the Holocaust, and really when you refer to the entire war as well, I want you to understand this, in that you have the German army, you have Hitler and the Nazi Party, and you have the SS. Okay, the Holocaust, all the atrocities of this war. Look at Hitler, the Nazi Party, and the SS. Again, the SS was like Hitler's secret police. The SS and the Gestapo was Hitler's secret police. They reported directly to Hitler. It was the military division of the Nazi Party. And then you had the regular German army on top of that. The regular German soldiers knew nothing about this. For the most part, regular German people did not know anything about this. Now, that's been debated over the years, because the question that you're going to ask as we go through this is, how in the world did the German people stand for this? How did they not stand up to Hitler? How did they not stop what was happening? Um, and the pure fact of the matter is that either they didn't know, or by the time they found out or had a hint, it was too late. And that's the sad fact. But the final solution is officially ordered on July 31st, 1941. The men that would put this into action, again, is the SS and the top Nazi officials. This was a very, very secret mission. Again, regular German soldiers had no idea what was going on. Even a lot of members of the SS did not know what was going on. Even top members of the Nazi Party claimed that they didn't know what was going on. Maybe had an idea that something was up, but wasn't exactly sure as to what it was. So the final solution, or the Holocaust, begins in July of 1941. Now, there were two different kinds of camps that were opened up. We've already talked about concentration camps. The first concentration camps were opened up in 1933 when Hitler first became Chancellor of Germany. Concentration camps were designed to send, again, opposing political party leaders, anybody who was a threat to Hitler and the Nazi Party. As the Holocaust begins, then we get two different types of camps. You have labor camps and you have death camps. Labor camps were camps for healthy Jews that were willing to work. So what's going to happen is that as the Holocaust really gets into full swing here, then those ghettos that were set up in Poland, where all the Jews were, you're going to have those Jews are rounded up. They'll be put on trains, and they're going to be taken to these camps, either labor camps or death camps. And you're basically, this is going to sound really bad, but it's what happened. It was like herding cattle. It was like putting all the cattle onto the trains and then taking them to the place to be slaughtered. And that's exactly what was happening here. In that these Jews were who've been moved to the ghettos in Poland were now being moved from the ghettos to the trains to go to these camps. If you were lucky enough, you would go to a labor camp, where if you were healthy, if you were of decent age, and if you were willing to work and to cooperate, then you would be used as labor. So basically, the train would pull right up to the front of the camp. They would be herded off, put into lines according to men, women, children. There were separate lines for elderly. And basically how this went is that members of the SS determined who was fit for labor, who was too old, Okay, if you were too old to work, or if you were too sick, or if you were too young to work, then you went straight to the other line, which were sent to death camps. Um, if you had someone who was of decent age, someone who could work, was willing to work, then those were usually, I hate to say the fortunate ones, but they were the fortunate ones that stayed at the labor camps. Life in the labor camps was very, very brutal. It was nonstop work and labor, very little food, almost to the point to where many, many people in the labor camps starved to death. Now, to say that people did not die in the labor camps is a false statement. They did die in labor camps. They were murdered. They were starved to death. There were diseases because, um, you know, even when they quit working at night to sleep, they were put into, the best way to describe it is like a chicken coop. If you've ever been to a farm to where you have the rows of chickens on both sides, and they're basically side by side. That's pretty much the way that the Jews were put in the labor and death camps, and that they were put into these small huts, and they were basically lying shoulder to shoulder. They were not given a bed. They were not given anywhere to sit. They were not given anywhere to clean off, and so they were dirty. They were nasty. You had all kinds of disease. There was not a place to go to the bathroom, and so they're living in all this dirt and filth and feces, and so disease is definitely a factor here. You have people that even if they survive all of this, they are skin and bones, literally. They have virtually escaped starving to death. And so that's why I say, if you're one of the fortunate ones to go to the labor camps, you may have a chance to survive. And I say may. It's also at these labor camps that it wasn't just work and things like this. Nazi doctors are also going to perform medical experiments. And this is going to sound disturbing because it is disturbing. But you have Nazi doctors who are going to go to these labor camps, and they're going to perform medical experiments. Now, to relate this to modern day, the coronavirus is hitting really, really heavy across the world right now. And the problem that we have is that, first of all, there's no cure for coronavirus that we know of yet, and there's no vaccine, which means that there is not a shot that we can get that prevents you from getting it. Um, the way that we get those is that you have to do all kinds of tests. You have to test out different chemicals and different pharmaceuticals to see what works and what doesn't, to see what kind of medical operations work and what doesn't. Well, what happens here is that Nazi doctors are going to test on the best subjects that there is, and that is live humans. They're going to test different medicines. They're going to test different surgeries. They even perform weird tests. You want to talk about open heart surgery, and organ removal, taking a liver out of one person, putting it in another to see if it actually works. Um, People are killed. Their brains are removed. Their brains are studied. Uh, I mean, you think about the most atrocities that anybody can go through with a medical experiment, and that's what these not, doctors did, including children. So these labor camps were very, 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 very brutal. Um, the others went to death camps. Death camps are going to be opened up, and death camps were designed specifically for that, for you to be killed. If you went to a death camp, you would be killed unless something happened. There were several different varieties of the murders. You had gas chambers, where basically people were stuck into this giant open room. Basically, they were stripped of their clothes before going in. They were told that they're going to get a shower. In a lot of cases, that was the ploy to get them to take all their clothes off, and to go into this empty room. Was that in some cases they were being told that they were going to take a shower, and when you haven't showered in months, that doesn't sound too bad anyway. But for the most part, they knew what was going to happen, and that you were going to go in. And once you're locked into these giant rooms, then you have the gas that comes down from the ceilings, and you're killed. You had deaths by shooting, by firing squad, by asphyxiation, all different types. Again, if you can imagine any type of murder or beating or whatever it is, it took place here. In regards to all the bodies, what do they do with all the bodies that they kill? Because you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, even millions of people in some of these camps. What do you do with the bodies? Well, the Nazis, or rather the SS, is not going to take the time to bury that many graves. So what you had were these giant furnaces, these giant basically fires, to where as the people died, you took and you basically cremated their bodies. So you would take, let's say 100 people, strip them of their clothes, they're completely naked. You put them into this giant empty room. You lock the doors. You open the gas up. It kills all of them. You take the bodies. You throw it into the giant furnaces. Their bodies are burned, turned to ashes, and then it's time for the next round to come in. And again, when I say that you think about the biggest atrocities of mankind, that's exactly what we're getting here. There is no way to excuse what happened. There's no way to look at any kind of bright side here. It is nothing but the worst of mankind put into action. And Adolf Hitler was the one pulling the trigger the entire way. Now, as the war comes to a close, as we get into 1945, and as we get past the Battle of the Bulge, and the United States is closing in on Germany, and the British are closing in on Germany, and the Soviets are closing in from the east, and they come through Poland and they come through Austria, then we began to learn exactly what was happening here. And those lucky ones that have survived up to this point are finally being liberated, which means that they are finally being set free. The Soviets, three of the major camps that they will free is Majdanek, Treblinka, and then Auschwitz. Auschwitz was the largest death camp by the Nazis. Auschwitz was located in Poland and was liberated by the Soviets. It was by far the largest of all the Nazi death camps. The United States, a couple of those that were liberated was Dachau and Dora Middleball, and then the British Bergen-Belsen. But those are just six of the death camps. There were hundreds, even thousands of different labor camps, death camps, concentration camps, all across Europe that were controlled by the Nazis. Now, the hard part here is that even if you're lucky enough to survive to the end of the war, to be liberated, then there was a new problem in that the people were starving to death. And you can't go from eating 100 calories or 200 calories every few days to all of a sudden eating whatever you want to. You will literally eat yourself to death because your body is not used to food, it's not used to eating. And so if you just eat and eat and eat and eat, then your body has no idea how to handle that, and it will shut down. And so even for those that were fortunate enough to be freed in the camps, they're still going to go through a long process of trying to get their bodies back to normal, of eating just a tad bit at a time, and over the next several weeks, working back up to maybe a normal routine. There were thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands, that even when they were freed by the Soviets or the Americans or the British, their bodies were too far gone. They may have survived another few days or another week or two, but it doesn't matter how much food they get; their bodies are already beginning to shut down. Can you imagine going through all of that for 3 or 4 years through these camps? You survive, the Americans or the British are coming to save you, and you're free, yet only to die just a few days later from starvation. Again, something that was very, very, very tough. So when we look at the aftermath of the Holocaust, unfortunately, we just don't have time to get into a lot of specifics here. But when the Holocaust was all said and done, 6 million Jews are murdered. It's about a third, or rather 2/3 of the entire Jews in all of Europe. I want to say that again. 2/3 of the entire Jewish population in Europe was killed during the Holocaust. 6 million Jews. Hitler's goal here was to exterminate the Jewish race, and he just about did it. Had he been more successful in World War II, maybe had he taken over the British with the Battle of Britain, or maybe he invades the Soviet Union with Operation Barbarossa, maybe if he's more successful in winning the war, maybe he accomplishes that goal. Fortunately, that doesn't happen. There were 9 million Jews in Europe in 1933. And so, again, 2/3 of the Jews that were in Europe are killed. But now it's not just Jews. I want to make sure that we get this clear. We always talk about the Jews and the Holocaust. It wasn't just a Jewish race. There were different people as well. Again, Hitler's goal here is pure-blooded Germans. There were a lot of people in Germany that were not pure-blooded Germans, and they were not Jews. They were maybe mixed races, or they were Poles, or they were Slavic peoples. And so this also included gypsies, it included communists, it included other political leaders, other nationalities. Basically, anybody that was not a pure-blooded German, which included minorities, black men and women, homosexuals, a lot of different groups. Again, if you weren't pure-blooded German, then you were in that group and you were targeted. So when it all came down to it, I want to say that the numbers here are going to show us that it's really more along the lines of maybe 13 million to 20 million people when it's all said and done. And I think the number is actually higher than that. I think we actually get closer. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I would say probably the exact number of people that died as a result of Adolf Hitler was probably close to 30 million people. 30 million people. That is a lot of people that's being handed or that's being killed at the hands of Hitler. And that's not even including just the regular war itself. All right. So again, the Holocaust specifically targeted the Jews, but keep in mind that there were other races as well that were targeted. If you are not pure-blooded German, you're targeted. Which again, the whole ironic part about this is that Hitler wasn't German. Hitler, it was rumored, and there is some historical evidence to suggest that Hitler was part Jewish on his mother's side. So, but again, when we talk about Hitler, then we talk about the epitome of hypocrisy here. Completely, families are completely broken up and destroyed. Again, if you are fortunate enough to survive the Holocaust and to make it all the way through the end, then at that point you have to go through trying to find your family. The unfortunate part of this is that most families were never reunited. There were some that were fortunate enough, but let's say that you have a father, a mother, and two children. Out of those four people, maybe one survive, or maybe two survive. Even if you have two members of the same family that survive, trying to find each other is such a difficult task. Most of the people that survived the Holocaust never found their families. Either they were killed or they were relocated to parts to where they were really hard to find for years on down the road. Matter of fact, I heard a story several years back that there was a man, a husband and wife. They were taken off in the Holocaust, them and their children. Their children died at death camps, but the husband and wife survived. Had no idea. Both had remarried, and then it was decades later that I believe the husband found out that the wife had survived. And so he goes to try to find her, to look her up, and only to find out that she had died a couple of years before of something like cancer. But that's pretty much what you get here, in that even those that were fortunate enough to survive the Holocaust, most of those were never reunited. Only a very few fortunate families were ever reunited ever again. Now, what about the members of the SS and the Nazi officials that were responsible for this? Well, we know what happens to Hitler. He kills himself at the end of the war. He is not held accountable for this. The other top Nazi officials, like Hermann Goering, like Rudolf Hess, like Joseph Goebbels, those men will be captured as the war comes to an end, and they will officially be put on trial in what's called the Nuremberg trials. For the first time in history, you have an international court system that is designed to handle basically crimes of warfare, crimes against humanity, and mass murder, genocide. The ironic part about this is that this giant courtroom is going to take place at Nuremberg, which, keep in mind, Nuremberg was the parade facilities that Hitler had basically built for all of his giant military parades. Well, that's going to be converted into a giant courtroom. And that's where the Nuremberg trials are going to take place. The top Nazi officials are going to be put on trial for war crimes. And again, it included top Nazi officials like Hermann Goering, Rudolf Hess, Joseph Goebbels, some of the top level officials of the Nazi Party. Most of these will try to say that they knew nothing about this. Very few actually admit to knowing anything at all. Only one really even apologizes. Says, yes, I didn't really know to the extent, but I did have idea that something was going on. I failed to stop it, and I truly apologize. And so out of those officials that were put on trial, only one of those was not given the death sentence. And I cannot think of what his name is at the moment. It's escaping me. It was a general. Um, I had to look it up. But he was given life in prison. All of the others were found guilty and given the death penalty. Um, now, Rudolf Hess will mysteriously kill himself. A couple of days later, they find him dead in his cell. Somehow he got a hold of a cyanide pill. But all of these top Nazi officials will be executed either at their own hands or by the hands of the different countries. And a little bit of poetic justice here. Their bodies are going to be cremated at the ovens at the death camp of Dachau. So these top Nazi officials that are put to death and their bodies are going to be cremated in the same furnaces that so many Jews have been burned before. Um, so justice will be served. Now, that being said, there has been a lot of theorists that believes that a lot of Nazi officials escaped without being caught, and over the years that's been proven to be true. There were areas of South America, including Argentina, that were havens for the Nazis and anti-Semitists. And there were a lot of top Nazi officials who escaped from Europe to go to South America. And in the decades following World War II and the Holocaust survivors and families are going to seek out these Nazis. And there were many that were caught in South America and brought to justice. There's even the theory that Adolf Hitler faked his own death to escape to South America. There's been no proof of that ever. A lot of conspiracy theorists, and I'm not saying it's not true, but there's never been any proof that Hitler survived the war. All indications point that he committed suicide on April 30th, 1945. There are still Nazi officials being arrested today. Matter of fact, if you Google it, there is an SS guard that was captured. I believe it was 2 years ago or last year, and he is on trial right now for war crimes because he was in charge of one of the death camps. And so, even 75 years after World War II ends, we still have an effort to try to bring any of those still living to justice. Now, what about for the Jews and going forward? Well, 3 years after World War II ends in 1948, the nation of Israel is recreated. Now, Israel was the original home of the Jews. If you go back several thousand years, Israel was the home of the Jews. Where modern day Israel is, where modern day Syria is, and even modern day Jordan, a lot of those areas were what was considered Israel as part of the Jewish faith and the Jewish race. Israel was done away with when the Romans came in 2,000 years ago. But in 1948, because of what happens with the Holocaust, the world and the newly formed United Nations, which we'll get into next chapter, decides that we need a country, a homeland for the Jewish race once again. So in 1948, Israel is reborn, and that's where Israel comes from today. Israel is in the Middle East. They're right off the Mediterranean Sea. It borders Syria, it borders Jordan, and there is a lot of violence in that area. And Israel has to fight constantly for its border. But that's why there are so many people in the United States and politicians who are such an ally of Israel. And that this is, you want to talk about a group of people that for many, 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 many years has just been at the bottom of the food chain. Now, there have been many ethnic groups that have been the same way. But you want to talk about for most of history, the Jews have been slaves. They've been murdered. They've been discriminated against. The Jewish race has just been done wrong time and time and time again. So the recreation of the nation to give them a new homeland, and is one of the reasons that Israel is one of the biggest allies of the United States today. And so when we get to the end of the Holocaust, again, you think about some of the biggest atrocities of mankind, and that's what you get here. Now, I do want to take just a couple minutes left. I know that I'm a little bit over on what I wanted to be, but just a couple minutes left. When you talk about the idea of genocide, which is exactly what the Holocaust was, genocide is mass murder. Okay, the Holocaust was not the only time in history that we get genocide. As a matter of fact, in the 20th century alone, there were dozens of cases of genocides. Now, granted, probably about half of those were by the Nazis. You had the Holocaust. Against the Jewish population. You had the genocide effort against the Soviet Union's population, which resulted in over 13 million people. Over 13 million Soviets died as a result of this. You have millions and millions of people that the Nazis killed in genocide. But as you go through the 20th century alone, you look at the genocide in Cambodia, where 10 to 33% of their entire population was killed off. You have the Armenian genocide in the beginning in 1915 in the Ottoman Empire, where about half of the Armenians, which was an ethnic group in Turkey, they were killed. You have the Rwanda genocide in they killed off 70% of the ethnic group of the Tutsis in Rwanda. You have the Greek genocide in the Ottoman Empire. You have the genocide in Bangladesh, which was in eastern Pakistan back in the 70s. Genocide in Algeria, the Irish genocide, the Assyrian genocide. So there just in the 20th century alone, there are so many cases of genocide, and I would say probably more recently, you have others. Let's look at as we go more into present day. You look at the genocide by ISIS. You look at the genocide by men like Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. And so again, genocide was not anything that was specifically for the Nazis during the Holocaust, but it is certainly probably the biggest in history, and especially in regards to modern history, it's pretty much what we kind of categorize everything by. All right, now, so as we conclude, I put several videos on the Google Classroom page. If you want to go back up and check out some videos, I usually show a lot of videos in regards to this. Usually in class, I will show some live footage, some very disturbing images. But I show that because I think it's very, very important for you guys to understand that this thing really happened. The final point that I want to make before I finish up, in that, believe it or not, there are a lot of people who believe that the Holocaust never happened. There are a lot of conspiracy theorists out there. And believe it or not, there are people who believe that the Holocaust was nothing but a political ploy, that it never happened. And I want to make sure that I tell you right now, it happened. Okay? I tell you that so that if you come across somebody like that, don't be surprised. But the Holocaust happened. There is pure blood evidence of it. There is so many video footage, photos, witnesses, survivors. It's impossible to dispute the fact that it happened. It happened. So if you want to, I'll leave this up to you. There are many, many videos on YouTube and in other sources where you can look at live footage of the devastation of the Holocaust. You can look up everything from maybe not the actual killings themselves, but the furnaces, the gas chambers, the camps, the conditions of the camps, medical experiments. It's out there. If you want to see it, it's out there. And I hope that you look it up to learn from and not just do it for your own kicks and giggles. Because, again, these are people's lives, families that were being destroyed here. The people that were responsible for this, they're certainly in a place right now that they don't want to be in. They will or have been punished for the things that they did. But I have posted some videos onto the Google Classroom page. I put some in regards to crash course history that gives an overview or an overview of World War II altogether. Some videos about the Holocaust, nothing that's too graphic. And then I'm also going to try to find. I haven't done this yet, but the last video that I'm going to look for is going to be a documentary. Some of the scenes that we looked at back during the war in Europe was based around the 101st Airborne Division. It's based off of the series Band of Brothers. There's a documentary to go along with that. And the documentary is an interview with the surviving members of the 101st Airborne Unit. It took place in the middle 1990s, about 20 years ago. Very, very good documentary. So I'm going to try to find that as well and post it. It's about 45 minutes long. I promise you, if you watch it, it will be worth your time. Please watch it. Please show these men the respect that they deserve. These men risked their lives to help the French, to liberate France, to help people that they didn't have to help, but it was their duty uh, to uh, um, to fight for freedom. So as we finish World War II, by all means, the largest war at this point up to date. We have not seen a World War III yet. Hopefully, we won't. The next time I see you, we'll be in chapter 17. So here in a couple of days, I will go ahead and start posting the videos for chapter 17, and we'll talk about what happens after World War II.